This week abroad, Guyana gets $36 million loan. Trump stands firm against migrant caravan. $13 billion Mexican airport development halted. Hello and welcome to This Week Abroad. I'm Javon Keys. Let's go around the region. A report on the Bahamian government's performance for the first quarter of the fiscal year was released last week. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest says even though the results are favorable, there is still work to be done. Here's a breakdown of those figures.
Of course, we know that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of getting our expenditures in line. But we are encouraged with where we are.
On Monday, government released a report on the budgetary performance of the country for the first quarter of the fiscal year, which runs from July 1st to September 30th. Revenue totaled $513.8 million. That represented a gain of $60.1 million over the same period last year. The report noted the increase was due in part to an increase in stamp tax and value-added tax collections. It also revealed that the government collected $199.4 million in VAT this quarter, compared to $167.4 million in the same period last year.
We obviously are benefiting from the increase in the value-added tax. We've seen, I think it's 32 million or so increase in VAT year over year. The message that we've been pushing all along is that in order for us to have a strong Bahamas, we have to have our fiscal house in order.
As it relates to government spending, the report stated that overall expenditure increased by $3.5 million, which accounted for a $39.1 million increase in recurrent expenditure and a $35.6 million decrease in capital expenditure. According to the report, the most significant increase came from payments to settle a portion of the government's budgeted arrears. It also showed that the government invested $37.5 million into Lucayan Renewal Holdings, the special purpose vehicle that is overseeing the sale of the Grand Lucayan Resort. It further detailed that the government incurred a net increase in liabilities of $136.5 million.
I ask for the continued patience and discipline and sacrifice from the Bahamian people as we correct years of policy that has not necessarily served us well for the long term.
Now over in Barbados, the all-inclusive Sandals Hotel chain will in a few weeks undertake one of its largest construction projects yet. Prime Minister Mia Mottley says the new $400 million Sandals Beaches Hotel in St. Peter should help boost the country's economy.
Subject to all of the relevant permissions being put in place, that this project will start in early January for the benefit of both the owners and shareholders of Sandals, but equally as important, the people and workers. That this is part of the light that is necessary to bring hope and to help Barbados out of this very difficult set of circumstances.
Government workers in Guyana can expect a pay increase in 2020, funded by the proceeds from the first sale of commercial oil. Guyana's Finance Minister Winston Jordan says the administration expects to earn some $300 million from the sale.
I foresee improvement in the social and economic status of Guyana. All right, I foresee improvements, progressive improvements in the human, cultural, and every other developmental aspect of the country. I know that we have been through lean periods, and for many of us, I don't see too many of us my age, but certainly those who lived through the 80s would have understood what it means about structural adjustment and to have incomes overnight turn into pennies because of the significant devaluations that we have had.
However, he's telling workers that the possible wage increase will be linked to productivity.
We have to take everything in context. We don't want to have a situation where I give you $2 and you lose $3. Okay? So one of the big things that has to happen is production has to be pulled up. We have to diversify, because otherwise you're going to just go on the internet and you're going to pick up Amazon and somebody else, and and then you're going to be asking for more salary because you have to buy more from Amazon and so on. So I think essentially we have to blend productivity with production.
And still in Guyana, a $37.6 million concessionary loan agreement was signed between the Guyanese government and China. The funds will go towards the establishment of a new data center and the creation of a smart city. Minister of Public Telecommunication Kathy Hughes says the project will increase internet access to the Guyanese people.
Of the National Broadband Project, and of course many will know that the smart city component has applications in terms of education. Here we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about smart classrooms in remote communities that allow citizens to connect to any part of Guyana or in fact any part of the world to improve and enhance learning.
The police will be among the first set of beneficiaries of the project, which is slated to be completed in 2019.
They tend to be centralized on our coastal strip, but now we can take it to the length and breadth of Guyana. And most importantly, the section that we want to start off with is our Safe City component. The Safe City component of the National Broadband Strategy brings technology into our policing mechanisms. It means that our police force would have the means. We're talking about digital license plates. We're talking about police cars that will be internet ready and have internet access to improve the timeliness of police response. We're talking about improving accountability and transparency.
And when we come back, poverty pushing Hondurans out. More TWA on the other side of this break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to This Week Abroad. Extreme poverty plaguing Hondurans has forced many of them to flee in search of a better life in the U.S. However, U.S. President Donald Trump isn't ready to welcome them with open arms. He has deployed thousands of troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to stop them.
This bus arriving in Honduras from Guatemala is delivering 23 migrants who have been deported. Many of those returning were part of a migrant caravan making its way across Mexico toward the United States.
We're moving backwards now with nothing, but we're happy because we're going home.
Francisco Enrique says he left Honduras because there's no work. He can't provide for his family. He and his wife felt the migrant caravan was their ticket out of poverty.
Our country is broke and our president doesn't support his own people. That's why I decided to leave with my wife and children.
In Agua Caliente, a town on the Honduran side of the border, locals say the number of migrants leaving the country isn't anything out of the ordinary. Kevin, a local food vendor, tells us the town relies heavily on the constant flow of migrants.
Businesses here depend on people leaving the country. Our only source of work are the migrants that stop here to eat.
Increased pressure from the United States to prevent more migrants from leaving has led to an increased police presence in town. But the border is very porous and mostly jungle. A local boy showed us just how easy it is for migrants to sneak across. We're walking along an area of the Honduras-Guatemala border that is not being patrolled by authorities. We're told many Honduran migrants who don't want to be seen by military police will often cross right here. This stream is the only thing that separates them from Guatemalan soil. At the official border crossing, as many as 50 migrants travel into Guatemala every day. Just as often, buses crowded with deported Hondurans fill the local immigration office. Francisco says he's glad to be back in Honduras, but he also says he would try leaving again, given the opportunity. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera, Agua Caliente. In one of San Pedro Sula's most impoverished areas, Paula Portillo says her living conditions have become unbearable.
How can someone live like this? Look, the door is unhinged. I asked God to let me live in a decent home and not live here anymore.
Paula says rats are eating away at her bed and she struggles to feed her young children. She says she's planning to do what thousands of other Honduran nationals have done, migrate to the United States.
The situation in this country is awful. That's why people are migrating. I'd like to migrate too. I tell my 2 daughters we're going to leave. They say, yes, Mom, let's leave.
Across the street, Josue Mejia runs a small motorcycle repair shop, but he says business is bad and people are out of work. Several of his neighbors have already left the country.
Many people from this area have migrated. Friends of mine have left too, and for the same reason, because there's no work.
Josue told us if he can't make ends meet soon, he may also leave the country.
Honduras ranks among the poorest nations in the world, where 6 in 10 homes are subject to extreme poverty. A majority of families that live in this shantytown in the city of San Pedro Sula don't have access to medical attention or clean water or even electricity. One of the biggest obstacles to addressing this level of underdevelopment is violence.
Many of the thousands of Honduran migrants making their way to the U.S. southern border say they're fleeing violence from gangs and criminal groups. With 44 homicides per 100,000 people, Honduras suffers one of the highest murder rates anywhere in the world. But most Hondurans looking to leave the country blame poverty and a lack of opportunity for wanting to flee. For Paula Portillo, the decision to leave Honduras comes down to doing what's best for her youngest children and breaking the cycle of poverty. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera, San Pedro Sula.
And please don't go away. We go further abroad in a bit, but first, here's a look at how some of the major international commodities ended trading this week. And coming up, Mexico's $13 billion airport project stopped. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to This Week Abroad. After years of a tense relationship between Japan and China, both countries have started historic talks in a bid to improve relations. Al Jazeera's Adrian Brown reports.
A red carpet welcome for a Japanese Prime Minister in Beijing would have seemed unthinkable just a few years ago. But now the leaders of Asia's two most powerful economies are talking rather than threatening each other. In discussions with China's Premier Li Keqiang, Shinzo Abe said he wanted to lift relations to a new level.
From competition to cooperation, relations between Japan and China is in the process of entering a new era.
China is Japan's biggest trading partner. The volume of two-way trade could grow even further, given the number of business deals signed here. This is a relationship marked by historical hostility and rivalry. But both sides agreed to work towards easing tensions in the East China Sea, where Japan and China claimed sovereignty over a cluster of tiny uninhabited islands. That dispute led to a wave of anti-Japanese riots in China 6 years ago. But on Friday, all that was forgotten.
China is willing to further strengthen the positive interaction with Japan, learn from history, and face forward towards the future.
The present was also on Abe's mind. During his talks, he said Japan was paying close attention to human rights in China. Increasing uncertainties in the two countries' respective ties with the United States are pushing Japan and China closer. Shinzo Abe worries about the United States' declining presence in the region, while President Xi Jinping hopes that Japan can help ease the impact of China's escalating trade war with the United States.
Japan is looking at both the United States and China and trying to figure out what's the best balance between these two states. Japan's biggest trading partner today is China, and that relationship will continue to be important. But Japan's security partner, without comparison, is the United States. But the United States and Japan also have many overlapping institutions.
So, in China, Japan's Prime Minister is having to perform a delicate balancing act. Adrian Brown, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
Great uncertainty looms in Brazil after the election of a new president, Jair Bolsonaro. Despite his spotted past, many see him as a wind of change. Here's more.
André Rodriguez lives in Rocinha. the largest slum in Rio de Janeiro. People living here have to deal with poverty and insecurity every day. But now that Jair Bolsonaro was elected president, many are not sure of what's coming next.
We have seen a war here between drug traffickers, and that affects our economy inside this slum. Many shops had to close because they couldn't make it. For things to change, we need investment in education. That's missing here. With education, we wouldn't have so many kids involved in drug trafficking.
Bolsonaro has promised to fight the crime wave that is killing thousands every year and to reinvigorate Brazil's economy. For years, those who live in the favelas have voted for Lula da Silva's center-left Workers' Party. But it was different this time.
Even though Jair Bolsonaro insulted in the past black people and minorities and could pass laws that could end up hurting the poor, he has managed to get votes in favelas like this one. The main reason is because he represents change.
Johnny Silva says that the economy is his main priority.
I am worried about the economy. It has lost investors with the crisis. Bolsonaro says a lot about security and corruption, but he hasn't talked much about the economy.
Bolsonaro has promised to liberalize the economy, privatize state companies, and reduce the deficit. He has also said that Brazil will be closer to the United States and Israel. He is expected to be more aggressive with China. But analysts say it won't be easy for him to put into practice many of his campaign promises.
It's not going to be so easy for Brazil to do whatever Trump does, because Trump can fight with China, because the United States have a high deficit in trade balance with China. Brazil has a very high surplus in trade balances, so it's not the same. And China is much more important for Brazil than Brazil to China. It's not like the US.
Anger towards the political class has helped Bolsonaro win the presidency. But even though his violent rhetoric scares many in Brazil, there are those who want their daily lives to change. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Rio de Janeiro.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced last week her plans to step down as the leader of her Christian Democrats CDU party in December and as Chancellor at the next federal elections. But how will this impact the wider EU?
Bundeskanzlerin der Bundesrepublik Deutschland.
When she was first elected German Chancellor in 2005, the rest of the world knew little about Angela Merkel. Now she's a household name. While other leaders have come and gone, Angela Merkel has stayed put here at the Chancellery, becoming a symbol of stability not just in her own country, but internationally too, even though her policies have been blamed for turning some voters against the European Union. Merkel was instrumental in bailing out Greece from 2010 onwards as the financial crisis spread. But the austerity measures imposed on the Greeks increased anti-EU hostility in many countries. Then, as Russia asserted itself on the world stage, notably by sending troops to help separatists in Ukraine and annexing Crimea in 2014, Merkel was blunt.
Nothing justifies or excuses the annexation of Crimea by Russia.
When, in 2015, Merkel unexpectedly allowed hundreds of thousands of migrants to settle in Germany, even as some countries were moving to keep them out, the rest of the EU applauded her gesture and then refused to do likewise. And so in 3 short years, her authority's been chipped away as the anti-immigrant AfD party gained support. Her ruling coalition with the centre-left SPD has never been more unpopular, leaving Merkel even less invested in EU reforms, which French President Emmanuel Macron has floated.
I think for the time being she's trying to avoid any other crisis and maybe pave the way for someone to succeed who then maybe with Macron together can get to the next stage. But I don't see her actually being the one actually to invest much in the next 3 years to really make a push.
Next year there'll be European Parliament elections across the continent. The big unknown is whether there'll be early general elections in Germany. If there are, things could change for everyone.
Just like the conservative voters are maybe banning the CDU to go to the AfD, we're talking about SPD voters going to the Greens. And should the Greens be strong enough, for example, at any potential new elections that happen before within the electoral cycle, then you might even see a more pro-European face of Germany.
For now, Angela Merkel is focusing on domestic issues and denying she has ambitions for a job in Brussels if and when she's no longer Chancellor. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera, Berlin.
Google employees worldwide walked off the job on Thursday. This was the latest in a series of protests against how the internet giant has handled a range of sexual harassment cases. Here's more.
Hundreds of Google employees walked out of the company's offices in New York City to protest sexism, racism, and unchecked executive power in their workplace. Nicole, a Google employee who would only give us her first name, explained why she participated.
Support women and to protest the way that this company has handled sexual harassment cases.
Google employee Tim Berry.
The truth still matters to people. And then if the truth is not recognized by those in leadership positions, that they should figure out a way to find that truth for themselves, and we will tell them for them as well. Time's up.
The walkout followed similar protests in Google offices around the world. Last week, the New York Times reported that the search engine giant gave a $90 million exit package to Andy Rubin, even though the then senior vice president had been accused of sexual harassment. Rubin denied the allegation. He also said the article exaggerated his compensation. Google did not dispute the report. Google employee Thomas Nealon.
I don't think Google has been an outlier, and I don't think that that's a good thing. I think Google should strive to be an outlier, like letting accused executives quietly walk away with buckets full of cash is standard, and it really should not be.
Google Chief Executive Sundar Pichai said in a statement that employees have raised constructive ideas and that the company was taking in their feedback to turn it into action.
It's a $13 billion airport project which was expected to boost the Mexican economy. However, Mexico's President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador cancelled it, saying it was riddled with corruption.
A new space-age airport meant to propel Mexico into the 21st century. Its cost, $13 billion. Its construction well underway. But on Monday, President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador brought it to a juddering halt. The project was riddled with corruption and cronyism, he said. Instead, other airports will have their capacities increased.
Two runways will be built in the Santa Lucia military airport. The current airport in Mexico City will be improved, and the Toluca airport will be reactivated.
But the decision was about more than just the airport or the markets. For many, it was an early sign of how the president-elect plans to govern. He said he'd let the people choose the way ahead via a national referendum. But when it was finished this Sunday, it was widely panned. Just 1% of the electorate turned out.
The questions were flawed, skewed in favor of the option that the new government wants. It was shown that voters could vote more than once in the different polling stations. I mean, hardly you can see this as a successful exercise of participative democracy.
López Obrador plans to change the constitution for more referendums on key issues. But that's not the sort of decision-making that will tempt future investors, say business leaders.
We hope that the incoming government make the rules of the game clearer, so that long-term projects don't suffer from the repercussions and mistrust of the Mexican government.
At the stock exchange, those repercussions were already being felt. The drop in the peso is a real reflection of the deep concerns of the markets and the business community. But the president-elect says that he's not governing for them, he's governing for the people, and first and foremost, the poor. He says the airport project's cancellation will save the country $5 billion a year, and his alternative plan will be finished in 3 years. By that time, Mexicans will also have a clearer idea of who they voted into power. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Mexico City.
And that's it for This Week Abroad. Thanks for going around the region and across the world with us. We're back next week with more regional and international business stories, but please join us Mondays to Fridays at 7:30 p.m. right here or live on our Facebook page for BATV News. I'm Javon Keys. Have a great week.